This is another episode of Standup Comedy, your host and MC, celebrating 40-plus years on the fringe of show business. Stories, interviews, and comedy sets from the famous and not so famous. Here's your host and MC, Scott Edwards.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast. We have another fun afternoon of information for you. I have on the line one of the regulars on the podcast, a tremendous stand-up comic, lots of television. He was a radio personality in several towns for many years, and a very good friend. Let's welcome to the show the one and only Tim Bedore.
Thank you. Oh, my God. What a crowd. What a crowd. What
Tim.
A sound effect. What a crowd.
Welcome back to the show. You and I have been having, as friends, a few conversations, and we came across the topic of, some of the strange things that happen in this industry we call stand-up. And you said that there's been a few instances that gave you pause in working in this industry.
Well, not enough pause, perhaps.
Yeah, because you still ended up in it, yes.
Because I still ended up in it. When I was starting out in stand-up comedy, I was still in radio in the mid-'80s, and stand-up comedy, as you well know, was very, very popular. A lot of clubs opening up, and people were selling out Tuesday and Wednesday shows sometimes. So, comedy was very healthy. Drag racing was, and always has been, racing in America, drag racing, very popular. But what was not popular was a comedy show at a drag race. Now, this is absolutely true.
No way. There was a comedy show at a drag strip?
So this is what happened. The radio station I was working at in San Francisco called The Quake, so bad name maybe for a radio station in San Francisco, but they had a client, Baylands Raceway, which was a very successful drag strip. And they liked comedy. They liked the radio station a lot, The Quake. We had comedians on all the time. It's where I met, for example, Jay Leno. Jay Leno came in to plug a show at the other cafe one day, and I got to know Jay, and then we hired him for a bunch of shows. We had Stephen Wright right after his Tonight Show appearance, that first famous one that he did. So, it was a comedy, stand-up comedy-oriented radio show. So the Baylands Raceway, they thought, well, let's have a comedy show and combine it with drag racing, and we'll have the comedians also do some drag racing. So everybody thought this
somehow that doesn't sound like a good combination, Tim.
Well, hundreds show up for drag racing and hundreds show up for a comedy show, but only 14 people showed up for comedy drag racing. Now, so you got 14 people, and this is at night, and we were performing from where the cars start out. The Christmas tree lights, the starting line, that's where the spotlights were. And that's the only place they could think that they should put the comedy was at the start. Well, the 14 people who were the audience were literally a quarter of a mile away at the finish line. So our 14 people are a quarter of a mile away from us. And even if you did get a laugh, it came back to you. It took so much time to get a quarter of a mile that you were already in the setup of the next bit, and then a laugh would come to you. It's like the Doppler effect or something. So
wow,
it
that
was
sounds
just
horrible.
But who would think of this? And, the ownership of the radio station, let's take a chance. The Baylands Raceway, this could work. So at one point, it was just going so bad. Thankfully, they're a quarter of a mile away. You can't see the disgust on the audience's face, the 14 people. So I'm walking around kind of nervously as I'm performing, and I noticed I just bought a new pair of tennis shoes. Reeboks came in, and that was the hot new tennis shoe, and I had these new Reeboks on. And I was standing. I had walked myself into a puddle of oil and whatever else. You know, when they smoke the tires before they take off, the drag tires, they smoke them. Well, there's a trough right before the starting line that they fill up with. It's like ammonia and a light oil. And I looked down at my brand new expensive Reebok tennis shoes, and this oil is seeping over the tops of my shoes.
No.
Stand-up comedy, it can ruin your shoes. It's so tough. So then, not only did this not go well, and this is how weirdly thought out this whole thing was. There were 4 comics, myself and 3 other guys, and one of the comics, we were supposed to race each other. They rented 4 Mustangs from Hertz. They didn't tell them that they were going to be using them for drag racing. I hope they took the insurance out. But they had these 4 manual shift Mustangs that the 4 comics were going to have a drag off with. And one of the comics did not have a driver's license. He literally did not.
This was like so risky in so many ways.
So, well, it was a different time, the 80s. We threw caution to the wind. So this guy, Al Cleason, didn't really know how to drive. And now he's drag racing with a stick shift. And he was racing me, and he went from third to reverse. He missed 4th gear, hit reverse, popped the clutch, and I literally heard metal clanging down the drag strip as I beat him because he blew out the transmission.
Oh, jeez.
Coasted to the side because his car was now disabled. He got in my car, and literally we drove back to the starting line. We were just so weirded out by this whole experience, but we might be in trouble. I don't know. We just left. We didn't even say goodbye. Didn't finish the race off.
Oh, no.
Left.
Oh, yeah. That is got to be the most bizarre gig I've ever heard of. I mean, there's a lot of strange things in this industry that you hear about, going into a biker bar and there's a beer box in the corner and that's your stage and there's, a little floodlight on you or something and no sound system and you're supposed to try to entertain a bunch of bikers shooting pool and drinking beer. And, there's some scary moments, but trying to perform at a drag race and then racing, that is got to be one of the most bizarre gigs I've ever heard of.
Yeah, it didn't scare me off. It's not like it's going to happen all the time, but you get this feeling that sometimes successful people who are even kind of smart really make stupid decisions.
We're talking about the drag race strip owners at this point.
Yes. Well, on the radio station, I mean, we had done a bunch of shows. A theater, a club, a cabaret, a drag strip. How would this even possibly work? In fact, Kevin Pollak, who you know, he's an actor. He's on The Amazing Mrs. Maisel and a wonderful stand-up comedian as well. Back in that same era where comedy was just taking off, and you had a club, full week club, but as comedy started getting kind of going, every place wanted to get in on it. And people would have a Sunday night, a Monday night, a Tuesday night, where they would have comedy in their pizza place.
Yeah, the one-nighters you're talking about. The one-night perked up part everywhere.
And people wanted in on it. People loved comedy, and they wanted to be in on it. So maybe their intentions were good. Or maybe they just wanted to goose up a slow Monday night or whatever it was. But Kevin told me this story. There was Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, so somewhere out in the East Bay. And they hired comics. 3 comics were going to do the show. Kevin was the headliner. And they, we've got a stage. We've got a sound system. We've got lights. They had none of it. Now, I don't know if they were lying when they said it or if they just forgot to do it. But when Kevin and a friend of mine, John Ross, showed up, there was nothing. There was no stage. People were just eating pizza in the restaurant as normal. And they said, well, where are we going to do the show? So, well, it was the pizza kind of place where people went up to a window to get their pizza. Somebody would get on a microphone that it was on a gooseneck, and there was a window, an open window in the wall behind the kitchen, in front of the kitchen, and they would just open the microphone and say, pepperoni for Johnson, pepperoni for Johnson. And the Johnson people.
Yeah, I was just going to say my first jobs were in pizza parlors with exact same setup where there's a window and the people would order on one side, pick up the pizza on the other, and we had this little gooseneck mic. It's very standard back in the day. And so where did they put the comics? Not behind that mic.
Oh, yes. They had no stage, so the comics had to do the show from the window where normally, you went to pick up your pizza.
That's actually in the kitchen.
That's in the kitchen, essentially. So I think they just did it for the laugh of it, the absurdity of trying to do a show. So you had, and Judd told me, you had to keep your hand pressed down on the lever that had the microphone open. And if you were gesturing with both hands, then you took your hand off the microphone. So now the mic shut off.
Also, you got a picture from the audience point of view that instead of guys being up on a professional stage, you're looking into the pizza kitchen and there's a guy you only get to see the top half of his body and he's trying to entertain you.
From about the chest up. So maybe it looked like TV. Maybe it looked like a TV.
Oh, that's funny.
John said that and it was going horribly. I mean, nobody's laughing. And they hadn't thought this part out. If somebody had ordered a pizza, how would they get it during the show? So an assistant manager just kind of shoved John aside at one point and said, pepperoni for Johnson, pepperoni for Johnson. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, not like the segue and the joke had some effect on the flow of the comedy bit.
Yeah. No, everybody wanted in on comedy in the 80s.
Yeah, that sounds like a bit of a nightmare gig. I did a few shows at the California State Fair, and that was a bit of a challenge. And we did do some shows in outside venues like one-nighters, but nothing quite. I think my sense of as a producer having an A room, I was pretty careful to make sure that the setups were at least reasonable. But I've heard some of those nightmare stories. And, what's interesting, Tim, is that to be a successful stand-up comic, you really kind of have to go through that crucible of horrible gigs. It kind of helps build your character, right?
Without a doubt. I mean, bad things can happen in great environments. Typically, they're not going to. But once you've been through the drag strip and the pizza joint and the outdoors, and I mean, I've performed during the day, which you should never do. And it's a county fair, and you're out there in the middle in the grandstand, and people are just milling around. You have to be tougher than the awfulness of the circumstance and just keep a smile on your face, because otherwise you won't get hired again. You'll be the difficult guy that, people will complain about. So, yeah, you just have to be tougher than the bad show.
Well, and it's also true that we tell anybody that's interested in stand-up comedy that you want to kind of take any gig you can get when you're in that open mic stage, because that's when you find your voice in the business and you kind of develop the thick skin you need to get through the industry. I mean, I've heard plenty of times where comics have gone up during like a poetry night, or literally there was a couple laundromats that would have stand-up comedy in a laundromat. I mean, and you're trying to fight the noise of the machines and the kids running around. And yet at the same time, as a guy that worked with comics to try to help them grow as an entertainer, I would recommend, you got to kind of take it any gig that comes along, because stage time is stage time.
Yeah. I mean, there was a phase where casinos would find empty space amongst the slot machines and do a show.
No, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Even in
and
a
they
casino.
would lie. Yeah. No, and people, they didn't shut down the slots. People were putting money in and pulling levers and bang, bang, bang. And it's never probably ever going to end how stupid some people can be about, well, you get up and you tell jokes. I mean,
well, didn't you have an experience with, you were in one of the stages, I think it was Caesars in Vegas, somewhere you were competing with tigers, right?
Well, competing, we were winning. So Caesars, this was later 80s, and they had this beautiful cabaret. It was, beautifully done, big stage, actually kind of a full theatrical stage, and probably, 400 seats, 500 seats. So it was a beautiful cabaret space, and they would have these regular comedy shows. Dr. Gonzo and I were there, and before the comedy show, they had a cat, a tiger, and I don't know if they had a lion or whatever, but it was a big cat show, kind of like a cheaper version of Siegfried and Roy.
Oh, so a magic show.
Yeah, kind of like a magic show with the animals and everything. And between shows, they would have literally the tigers in dressing rooms, just in a dressing room, not in a cage. They didn't take them back to the zoo. They had their own dressing room. But I hope they had a porta potty, because tigers are big animals. So the comedy show would come on essentially right after that magic show. And because they had all kinds of props, we were performing. The comedy show was in front of the front curtain. So we only had like 6 feet between the front curtain and the lip of the stage. And that's where the comedy show got done, because all the jumps and the magic props and the cat stands and everything were behind us, behind the curtain.
Yeah, they gave them room to behind the curtain to do things where the term behind the scenes comes from, to deal with all the props and everything from the magic show. And what was interesting about stand-up comedy, that you could go from a laundromat to a stage show like Caesars, is you don't really need that much room, kind of 8 square feet. So I'm just painting a picture for the audience. It makes perfect sense.
Now, I would prefer never to do that again, because you don't know maybe where the lip of the stage is, and you might fall into somebody's lap. But other than that, it was fine. You had 6 feet to work with up against the curtain. And every night after their show was done, they would take the cats through the stage, across the stage from the dressing rooms. They would walk them across, and then they would take them out to a truck, and then take them to the place where they were staying overnight.
And again, behind the curtain, right?
Behind the curtain, right behind the curtain. So you would hear, every night, you would hear a chain and very, very thick claws of a tiger walking across right behind you, right behind the curtain. The audience didn't know it, but I knew that, this is the time they load out the tigers. And you'd hear people walking and maybe the occasional roar of a tiger. But for the most part, you'd hear the chains and you'd hear nails on the wood stage. Well, one night, I'm in the middle of my act, and I'm looking at the audience, and their eyes start getting wider, 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 mouth opening, and I'm thinking, I'm dying up here. What did I do that's producing this result? but then they were looking not at me, but behind me. And I turned around, and there was a tiger's head about 2 feet from my ass. The handler, as a joke, had opened the curtain a little bit and got the tiger to stick its head out, and I turned around and just about jumped into the crowd. I mean,
I think I might have. Talk about a scary moment. I mean, you knew the tigers were back there, but still to have one that close to you, and no wonder the audience was a bit distracted.
Oh, without a doubt. And I almost did. I mean, I almost literally left, but I could see the handler just had this big beaming smile on his face that he knew.
Yeah, let's fuck with the comic right in the middle of his act.
Oh, man.
Well, that sounds like a scary moment. Well, Tim, thanks for sharing those stories. And I think it just goes to prove that if somebody wants to get into stand-up comedy, you kind of have to be prepared for anything. In fact, I was talking to a mutual friend of ours, Jazz Kaner, and the topic came up, especially in the 80s and 90s. Comedy was just getting picked up and exploding all over. It's like all the discos of the 70s became comedy clubs in the 80s. And of course, everybody had to come up with their own unique name. So like, for example, my chain of clubs was Laughs Unlimited, which was kind of unique. I'd never heard anything like it. There was a club, everyone's heard of the Comedy Store and the improvisation, the improv. And there was a place early on called the Laugh Stop. Jazz Kaner, one of his favorites was Sir Laughs a Lot, which is a pretty interesting name. But he did share with me that he thought after traveling the South that he was very surprised he never came across Bubba's Chuckle Hut. Bubba's Chuckle Hut would have been a perfect name.
Chuckle Hut.
Yeah, the Chuckle Hut.
Absolutely.
Did you work anywhere that had some unique names?
Well, Sir Laughs a Lot, actually, not only did they have the name and the logo was a knight, but they had a full suit of armor in the lobby.
Really?
And the owner had invested, and that's where the name came from. He just wanted to display it. So he came up with Sir Laughs a Lot. The worst named club, for example, we had in San Francisco, the Holy City Zoo, which some people think is the perfect name because nobody knows what that means. It's just off the wall, and I happen to like it. Some people hate it, but then it was sold and it became the Ha Ha A Go Go.
No, I didn't hear that. The Ha Ha A Go Go. That's like such a 50s thing. Why would anybody think that would work in the 90s?
Don't know, and it didn't last long. Rooster Teeth Feathers. What is that?
Right, that's an interesting name. I remember working with them. There was also a place called Bananas.
You can see how that might work. The worst, and I never even worked this club because it only lasted 6 months. It was in Santa Barbara, and for some reason, the owner thought this would be genius. He named the club Pee Yo Pants. So he was making a play on Pee Your Pants. So you're going to laugh so hard you're going to pee your pants. But he didn't want to say Pee Your Pants as the name of his club. That would be, that'd be low. That'd be slumming. That would be you couldn't get on radio or TV or the newspaper.
So come on down and pee your pants.
Pee Your Pants. So he named the club P, period, the initial P, and then Yo Pans was YOPANZE, P, Yo Pans, as if there was somebody, Peter Yo Pans, that owned the club, and he paid a lot of money to a graphic artist. It was very expensive, and it was huge. The back wall of the stage had this giant, colorful name, P. Yo Pans, on the stage, so nobody could miss it. Well, week one, all comics are making fun of P. Yo Pans. And, if you were dry when you walked out, could you get your money back? And, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, it kind of lends itself to mockery.
Well, and the owner got furious. He was so pissed off that people were making fun of his genius name that it got to the point fairly quickly that if you're working this club, if you mention the name of the club on stage, I will not pay you. So now...
Yeah, normally it's self-promotion, right? But he's threatening
At
him.
least. So he goes the other way and says, don't mention the name of the club. So now you've got all these comics who are on stage, and there's an obvious joke right behind them, but you can't use it because you won't get paid. So the audience had to be going, who are these guys that don't even see the obvious joke? P.O. Pans is right behind them. And it closed in 6 months.
Well, Mr. Yopans, I think, made a mistake.
Yeah.
Well, the point of sharing this is that there are unique names of comedy clubs all across the country. And it Catch a Rising Star and Cobb's Comedy Club. And you kind of wonder where these names come from. The Laugh Factory is obvious. The Comedy Magic Club in Hermosa, those are obvious. Laughs Unlimited was a little bit of a stretch. But when you get to places like P. Yopans, there's obviously somebody's taken that extra step of creativeness that killed them.
Yes, right there, day one, and spent a lot of money on it and was very proud of it too.
Yeah, well, it's great information, ladies and gentlemen, in whatever city you're in as you're listening to this. We would love to hear from you. You can shoot me an email or whatever, and let us know the name of the comedy club in your area. But Tim, thanks so much for sharing some of your funny with information about stuff that's happened in your life as a stand-up comic, and also some of the strange comedy club names you've come across.
My pleasure.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we hope you enjoyed this short podcast, this week's show. It's been always fun talking to my friend Tim Bedore. You'll know him from Vague But True. And Tim, you have a great podcast. Why don't you tell everybody about it?
Oh, well, I'm at the point in life where it's my turn to give back. I try to help people. It's called An Agnostics Guide to Heaven. I'm a spiritual guru and a life coach, and I call it An Agnostics Guide to Heaven because I think that if I help you be less annoying to me and there is a heaven, you have a better shot at getting in. So,
well, it's a great podcast. I've listened to several of the shows. So, ladies and gentlemen, keep an eye out for Tim Bedore on Vague But True, segments on the Bob and Tom Show. And he has got his own podcast. It's available on all platforms. Tim Bedore, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will be back next week with another great show. We appreciate you listening. Be sure to tell your family and friends and share this as we're trying to grow the audience. Hey, have a great week. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC. For information on the show, merchandise, and our sponsors, or to send comments to Scott, visit our website at www.standupyourhostandmc.com. Look for more episodes soon and enjoy the world of stand-up comedy. Visit a comedy showroom near you.